30 black SUVs just pulled up outside, and they're asking for the nanny. The words tore out of Catherine Mercer's housekeeper before she could stop them, her voice cracking like old ice. Mia Voss stood frozen in the staff quarters, her hand still wrapped in fresh bandages, morning light slicing through rain-streaked windows in thin, merciless lines. 7:42 in the morning. She could hear them now. Car doors slamming in perfect synchronization. One after another. 30 vehicles forming a perimeter around the Mercer estate like an occupying force. The sound echoed through the old house, not the sound of a social visit, but the sound of an operation. Military precision. Practiced efficiency. Mia moved to the window. What she saw stopped her breath. A wall of men in dark suits stretched across the circular driveway, their earpieces glinting in the grey Seattle drizzle. They stood motionless, hands at their sides, faces blank as stone. They were waiting for something. Waiting for someone. And then the crowd parted, and one man stepped forward. Aleandro Castellano. She recognized him instantly. The sharp jawline. The scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone like a blade had claimed him once and marked him as something other than human. The way he moved, each step controlled, each breath deliberate, like a predator who had learned patience centuries ago. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her wages, and he wore it like armor. His dark eye scanned the mansion's entrance with the intensity of someone counting his enemies. 3 days ago, she had thought he was just another victim of street violence. She had been wrong about so many things. 3 days earlier, at the Mercer mansion, a Wednesday morning that felt no different from any other Wednesday morning that Mia had lived through in the past 6 months. The Mercer house rose 5 stories above the Seattle hills like a statement about money, about old families, about the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone already knows. Limestone columns. A driveway the size of a parking lot. Rooms that echoed with emptiness. Mia had worked there as a live-in nanny for 4 months, and in those 4 months, she had learned every corner of the house and had been thanked exactly once. Emma was 7 years old. She had golden hair and her mother's cold eyes, and she was the only person in the entire mansion who seemed to remember that Mia existed. On that Wednesday morning, Mia woke at 5:30 in her cramped room on the servants' floor. 5:30 because that was when the light began, and she did not waste electricity by using lamps. She counted out her money on the thin mattress. $34. That was everything she had left in the world. $34 to last how long? She did not let herself finish that thought. Her stomach made a sound like something small and wounded. She had given her lunch to Emma yesterday, who had said the cook made the sandwiches wrong, that she did not want them. Mia had wrapped it carefully and eaten it standing in the kitchen at midnight, tasting the butter and bread and the small, hard truth that in this life, you take what you can get and you do not ask for more. She dressed in the grey uniform Catherine Mercer had provided. It hung on her like a ghost. 2 months ago, before everything fell apart, before the shelter closed down, before she had to run from the man who had promised to find her, she had weighed 145 pounds. Now she weighed something closer to 120. Bones showed where bones were not supposed to show. The bandages on her wrists itched. She had wrapped them herself 2 days ago, after the accident on the subway platform, and she had not changed them because the Mercer family did not pay for things like medical supplies or questions about where unexplained bruises came from. Catherine Mercer paid for competence and silence, in that order. By 6 in the morning, Mia was in Emma's room. The child was already awake, sitting on the edge of her 4-poster bed in her nightgown, waiting. They did not speak. They never spoke in the early morning because Catherine Mercer slept until 8, and sound traveled strangely through the mansion's walls. Instead, Mia braided Emma's hair. Slowly. Carefully. Making it something beautiful. The child closed her eyes and leaned back against her, and for those minutes, neither of them existed as the things the world had decided they were. At 6:45, Mia helped Emma into her school uniform. A pleated skirt. A white blouse. Shoes that cost more than Mia's entire wardrobe. The child looked down at her feet and frowned. I do not like these shoes, Emma said. Her voice was small and careful. Why not? Because they are too hard. They hurt. Mia knelt in front of her and examined the shoes. They were pristine. Unworn. Clearly expensive. She reached into her pocket and removed something she had been carrying since the day she arrived at the mansion, a pair of children's shoes she had kept from the shelter, small pink shoes with velvet laces, the first shoes Emma had ever owned when she was born. No, not Emma. A different girl. A girl from another life that no longer existed. She kept them anyway. Mia removed the expensive shoes and set them aside. She put the small pink shoes on Emma's feet. They fit perfectly, like they had been waiting 7 years for this exact moment. Better? Mia asked. Emma looked down, then up at Mia, and her face changed into something that looked almost like peace. How did you know my feet would fit them? I know your feet. It was true. She had been Emma's nanny long enough to know everything about her. The way she walked. The way she breathed. The way she made sounds in her sleep like a small animal in pain, and Mia would sit on the edge of her bed for hours, not moving, not breathing loud, just staying. You can wear the nice shoes when Mommy comes to pick you up from school, Mia said. But today, wear these. Today, comfort matters more than what people think. Emma nodded, solemn as a judge. Will you always know what I need? Mia did not answer. She could not promise that. The world had taught her that people leave, that nannies get fired, that children who loved you would forget your name within a month of you being gone. Instead, she braided the child's hair one more time and walked her downstairs for breakfast. Catherine Mercer was waiting in the dining room, seated at a table that could have fed 20 people but held only her, drinking black coffee and reading something on her phone. She did not look up when they entered. Emma will be late for school if you dawdle, Catherine said. She is ready now, Mia replied. Her voice was the practiced voice she had learned to use, the one that was not quite a whisper but close enough. Catherine Mercer set down her phone and finally looked at Mia. Really looked at her. Her eyes traveled from Mia's wrapped wrists to her face and then back to her wrists, and something flickered across Catherine's expression. Not concern. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of a woman who knew exactly what happened on the city streets at night. There is someone coming to the house tomorrow evening, Catherine said. A business associate. Douglas Hale. He will need to be treated as a guest. Is that understood? Mia's throat closed. She knew that name. She knew it the way a rabbit knows the sound of a hunter's footsteps. Yes, she managed. Good. Prepare the guest room. Cook something appropriate. And keep Emma away from the main floor tomorrow night. I will not have her disrupting business. Catherine Mercer returned to her phone, dismissing them both with the gesture. Emma tugged on Mia's hand, and they left the room. But in the hallway, Emma stopped and looked up at her nanny. You are scared, Emma said. It was not a question. No. Yes, you are. Your hand is shaking. I can feel it. Mia looked down at her own fingers, and the child was right. They trembled like leaves in wind. She uncurled her fist and placed her palm flat against her dress. Sometimes, Mia said slowly, grown-ups are scared of things that children do not need to worry about. That is how it is supposed to be. But if you are scared, I will be scared too, Emma said. And then who will be the one who knows what we need? The words hit Mia like a blade through the heart. She stopped there in the hallway, surrounded by paintings of dead Mercers who had never had to count $34 and ration every breath, and she made a decision. She could not stay here. She could not wait for Douglas Hale to arrive at this house. She could not put this child in danger by association. She had to run. Again. The question was how. $34 would not get her far. $34 would get her to the bus station and maybe onto a single bus going anywhere that was not here. But Emma needed her, and Mia needed to survive, and the two things seemed impossible to hold together in the same moment. They walked to school in silence. The Seattle rain had started again, that persistent drizzle that made everything look like it was slowly dissolving. Mia held Emma's hand and felt the weight of the child's trust like a stone in her chest. At the school gates, Emma turned and wrapped her arms around Mia's waist. "Come back," Emma whispered into her uniform. "Please come back." "I will," Mia said. She was lying. She knew she was lying. But the lie felt necessary, like a kindness that was more important than the truth. She watched Emma join the line of uniformed children moving into the building. The child turned around twice, 3 times, looking for Mia in the crowd. Mia stayed until Emma disappeared through the doors, until the separation became final. Then she walked toward the Seattle downtown core, toward the subway station where everything was going to change. The fluorescent lights of Pioneer Square Station hummed with that particular emptiness that belongs only to late-night transit hubs. Past midnight on a Thursday, the trains running thin, the platforms mostly abandoned. Mia Voss climbed the stairs with her shoulders curved inward, the way a person learns to climb when they have spent years making themselves smaller. Her uniform from the Mercer house clung to her like a second skin, black and white and starched, marking her as staff, marking her as invisible. She had worked 14 hours that day. 14 hours of watching Emma's small face during breakfast, of braiding the child's hair, of cleaning up after a family that lived in rooms so large you could lose an entire other life inside them. Her converted closet bedroom at the mansion was waiting, 8 feet by 6 feet, one window that didn't open, a twin mattress on the floor she'd found at a thrift store 3 months ago. She earned $2,100 a month to sleep in what used to be storage space. The November rain had started again outside, that persistent Seattle drizzle that made everything look like it was slowly dissolving at the edges. Mia could hear it from inside the station, the sound of water against concrete, the whisper of the city being slowly worn away. She was thinking about Emma, about the way the child had held her hand during the afternoon walk through Kerry Park, about how Emma's questions never stopped coming. Where do rain clouds go? Do they get tired? Can sad people see colors? The child asked as if the answers mattered in some profound way, as if Mia's responses were stones being stacked into a foundation. The weight of being needed by a 6-year-old was a strange thing to carry. It made leaving harder every single time. As she reached the top of the stairs, she heard it. A grunt of pain. Sharp. Male. The sound of something soft hitting something hard, maybe a body hitting a wall, maybe a fist hitting flesh. Then the shuffle of feet, then silence that was somehow worse than the noise had been. She should keep walking. She had learned this fundamental rule somewhere in the years of running, in the shelters and the cheap hotels and the long nights working for minimum wage. Keep your head down. Do not draw attention. Survive invisibly. This rule had kept her alive when other women from the network had not survived at all. This rule was the difference between breathing and not breathing. But Mia stopped. She turned back toward the sound. There, slumped against the tiled wall near the closed coffee kiosk, was a man. He was tall, perhaps 6'1", and broad-shouldered in a way that suggested expensive tailoring and consistent protein and the kind of genetics that meant he had never in his life gone hungry. One hand was pressed to his shoulder, and blood was seeping between his fingers like red water through a cracked dam. His dark suit was torn at the seam, and an expensive watch caught the fluorescent light, the kind of watch that cost more than everything Mia owned. His face was pale, the kind of pale that comes from sudden trauma, but his eyes were alert. Calculating. Even in pain, even bleeding onto the subway floor, something about his expression suggested that he was measuring things, assessing threat levels, deciding what came next. His eyes locked onto hers. "Hey," Mia said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Hey, you need help. Call 911, he rasped. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, but fractured now, breaking at the edges with pain. Mia was already pulling out her phone, the one with the cracked screen that cost her $23 and had taken 6 weeks to afford. Already did, she lied, because she could see the blood and she could see that he needed more than her presence, but that her presence might be the only thing keeping him conscious. She dialed. She got through to dispatch. She gave them the station location with the calm of someone who had called emergency services before, who knew how long they took, who understood that the first 5 minutes of anything could be the difference. While she waited for them to acknowledge, she was already moving. She unwrapped her scarf. It was the only nice thing she owned, thrift store wool, deep blue, something her mother had maybe worn once in a photograph Mia barely remembered. She pressed it against the wound in his shoulder, and immediately it began to turn dark as the blood soaked through. The pressure of it, the physical act of stemming someone else's bleeding, reminded her of being 17 years old and holding pressure on her own wounds, before the shelter, before the escape. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep him conscious, trying to keep him talking, trying to keep his eyes open and focused on her face instead of sliding toward the dangerous void of shock. "Doesn't matter," he said. "It does," Mia replied. She was surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "It matters because I need to know who I'm looking at right now. I need to know if you're here with me or if you're drifting somewhere else." He studied her for a long moment. The fluorescent lights made his eyes look like storm clouds, like something solid and dangerous that could break apart at any moment. "Aleandro," he said finally. "Aleandro Castellano." She didn't know the name. She had never heard of him. She had no way of knowing that she was kneeling beside one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest, that his empire extended from Vancouver to Portland, that the people who worked for him would do things without hesitation that other people would spend decades in prison for. None of that information existed in her knowledge. He was just a man who was bleeding, and she was just a woman who had decided not to walk past. "I'm Mia," she said. "Mia Voss." Silence sat between them for a moment, heavy and full. Then, "Thank you, Mia." The ambulance took 7 minutes to arrive. In those 7 minutes, Mia learned things about Aleandro Castellano that she did not quite understand. She learned that he flinched when she adjusted the pressure on his wound, but did not cry out. She learned that his hands, when he was not pressing them to his injury, clenched and unclenched like he was working through calculations in his own mind. She learned that he asked her questions: where was she from, what was her story, why did she stop, and when she answered with only half-truths, he seemed to understand that some people do not give away their full selves, that there are valid reasons for editing your own biography. When the paramedics arrived in their high-visibility vests and urgent movements, when they began their own assessment and their own questions, Aleandro reached out. His hand found her wrist, the one that had been holding pressure, and he held it, just for a moment. "I won't forget this," he said. She thought it was pain talking. She thought it was the kind of thing people say when they are being lifted onto stretchers and their bodies are still screaming and their minds are fragmenting into shock. She had no idea, absolutely no idea, that Aleandro Castellano never forgot a debt. That debts to him were not things that accumulated interest or faded with time. They were sacred, ancient, the kind of obligation that shaped the entire structure of his world. She watched them load him into the ambulance. She watched the doors close. She watched the vehicle pull away from the curb and disappear into the November rain, its lights cutting through the darkness like a blade wrapped in ice. Then she was alone on the platform again. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in his blood. Her scarf was gone, soaked and bundled into a medical bag. She had just given away the only nice thing she owned to a stranger. The rational part of her brain, the part that kept careful track of expenditures and survival, was screaming at her. But another part of her, the part that had remembered, in that moment, what it felt like to be bleeding and invisible, what it meant to have someone choose to look at you instead of walking past, that part of her felt like it had done something that mattered. She took the train back to the Mercer mansion. She arrived at 1:15 in the morning. She slipped through the service entrance, knowing which doors didn't creak, knowing the rhythm of the household. The staff quarters were dark. She washed the blood from her hands in the bathroom sink, watching it swirl down the drain, watching the water run clear. In her pocket, $34. In her mind, the man in the dark suit and the storm cloud eyes who had said her name like it was something worth remembering. She had no way of knowing that in 3 days, everything was going to change. The rain hammered against the hospital window like 1,000 accusations. Mia Voss lay motionless in the narrow bed, her left eye swollen shut, her throat marked with purple handprints that looked like violent poetry written across her skin. The bruises told the story her voice could not, or would not, tell. A plastic hospital band circled her wrist, printed with a patient number and the words unknown insurance. She had been conscious for 12 minutes. In that time, she had not cried. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus for months ago, fleeing Portland with nothing but the clothes on her back and a pair of white leather baby shoes wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of her backpack. Those shoes had belonged to a child she had never met, found in a donation box at the women's shelter. She had kept them anyway. They whispered that survival was possible. That people, even small people, had futures worth protecting. Now, as the four dripped clear fluid into her arm, Mia wondered if she had a future at all. The door opened. Aleandro Castellano stepped into the room like he owned it, like he owned everything he entered, from the carpet beneath his feet to the oxygen molecules suspended in the air. He was still in his storm-soaked suit, the fabric clinging to shoulders that looked carved from granite, the white silk shirt beneath unbuttoned at the neck to reveal a thin gold chain and a patch of dark chest hair. Water dripped from his black hair onto the linoleum floor. His eyes were the color of a winter sky before a blizzard, and right now they held the kind of fury that made the machines around Mia's bed seem to accelerate their beeping. Behind him, Vinny and Dario exchanged the kind of look two men exchange when they have just witnessed something they will spend years trying to explain. In 15 years of working for Aleandro Castellano, they had never seen him enter a hospital. Never seen him soaked through with rain. Never seen him sit beside a woman in the chair usually reserved for family members. Aleandro pulled the chair closer to her bed. The scrape of metal against linoleum sounded like a door slamming shut in a parallel universe where different choices had been made. "You're safe," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "The doctors say you have a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and severe bruising to your throat. No permanent damage. You will heal." Mia turned her good eye toward him. Recognition flickered, then confusion. She knew this face from somewhere. The sharp jawline, the scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone like a blade's memory. But the context was wrong. He was wrong. He belonged in a different world entirely, one where men wore expensive suits to intimidate rather than comfort. "Why are you here?" Her voice came out shattered, a whisper dragged through gravel. "Because you stayed with me," Aleandro said simply. "In the subway. When I was bleeding. You stayed." The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Somewhere in the hallway, a nurse called for Dr. Patterson. Someone's family member laughed at something that wasn't funny. The world continued its ordinary rotation while Mia tried to process the sentence this man had just spoken. That was different, she managed. "You were a stranger." "Yes. And you didn't walk past me. You sat with me in the dark." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tell me who did this." The command was soft. That was what made it dangerous. Not the volume, the certainty beneath it, the absolute assurance that whatever she told him would be answered, eventually, with consequences measured in more than words. "I can't." Mia closed her eyes, the good one and the swollen one. "It's complicated. He has connections. Money. And she." "Start at the beginning," Aleandro interrupted. Not unkindly. "Tell me everything." So she did. The story poured out in fragments, punctuated by winces when her cracked ribs protested movement. The modeling opportunity in Portland that turned into locked doors. The men with cold eyes who told her the debt had always been there, hidden in the fine print, accumulating interest. Douglas Hale's predatory smile and the business card that promised everything. The escape with $34, every penny she had managed to save by eating less, working double shifts at a diner where the owner counted the tips herself and often miscounted in her own favor. She told him about the women's shelter, the thin cot, the 4-month search for a job that didn't require a permanent address. About finding the nanny position at the Mercer estate, about the closet bedroom disguised as a staff quarters, about Emma, who was 7 years old and had asked why Mia lived in a cupboard like an unwanted thing. She told him about seeing Douglas Hale across the street from the piano lessons, that moment when her blood turned to ice and she understood that running was never going to be enough. About Catherine Mercer introducing him at the dinner party like he was a venture capitalist instead of a predator wearing a blazer. About being cornered in the hallway, Hale's whisper in her ear, "Didn't think you could run forever, did you?" She told him about the $125,000 he claimed she owed. The contract that wasn't a contract. The 2 weeks before he promised to take it out of her hide. When she finished, Aleandro was very still. The kind of still that comes before thunder. "What is the address of the Mercer estate?" he asked quietly. "Queen and Hill." "But you can't." "What are Catherine Mercer's business interests?" "I don't know. Real estate, I think. Coastal development projects." Aleandro stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked city below, at the lights blurring through the downpour, at all the lives being lived in ignorance of what had just shifted in the universe. When he turned back, his expression was carved from stone. "I am going to tell you something," he said. "Something I do not tell many people." He returned to the chair. Saturday. The rain intensified outside, the kind of downpour that makes people feel small, that makes survival feel like a miracle. "I grew up in South Seattle," Aleandro continued. His fingers gripped the chair's armrest so tightly his knuckles went white. "My father was a violent man. A cruel man. He beat my mother until she stopped getting up. Beat me until I learned to hit back harder. We had nothing. No one helped us. No one stayed." His eyes found hers. "I clawed my way out of that life, and I made myself a promise. I swore that no child would suffer like I did. No woman would be hunted like you are being hunted. Not on my watch." "I don't understand," Mia whispered. "You. The most ruthless Mafia boss in the Pacific Northwest," Aleandro finished. "Yes. And you saved my life anyway, not knowing who I was or what I could do for you. That is rarer than diamonds, Mia Voss." He leaned back. The chair creaked beneath his weight. "When you are released from this hospital, you will come to my estate on the edge of the city. You will have your own room. A real room with a door that locks from the inside, windows that look out on gardens instead of brick walls. You will have security. You will have safety." His voice dropped lower. "And Douglas Hale will learn what happens when someone hurts what is mine." Mia's good eye widened. I don't belong to anyone." "No," Aleandro agreed. "You belong to yourself. But you are under my protection now. That is different. That is a promise I make, and promises like this do not break." Through the window behind him, lightning fractured the sky into pieces. For a moment, his silhouette was outlined in white fire, and Mia understood something that would take her weeks to put into words. This man was darkness wearing a suit. This man was the storm. And somehow, impossibly, he had chosen to stand between her and the rain. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "I have nothing to offer you." "You already gave me something no one else has in 20 years, Aleandro said. His jaw softened slightly, and the scar across his cheekbone seemed to fade. "You saw me as human." After he left, after Vinny and Dario had quietly moved into the hallway and resumed their positions as sentinels, Mia reached for the backpack they had brought from the Mercer estate. Inside, untouched, were the small white leather shoes. She held them against her chest and finally allowed herself to cry. 3 blocks away, in a mahogany-paneled office in Pioneer Square, Aleandro made 2 phone calls. The first was to Agent Sarah Chen at the FBI field office. A woman who owed him a favor, who had turned a blind eye to certain activities in exchange for information about larger, more destructive crimes. "Douglas Hale," Aleandro said. "Trafficking network operating out of Portland. Women, mostly. Young women. I'm sending you everything. The second call was to Marcus Webb, his financial investigator. A man with the ability to trace money through 7 different countries and back again without leaving a paper trail. "Catherine Mercer," Aleandro said. "I want to know where every dollar comes from and where every dollar goes." He hung up and looked out his office window at the rain-soaked city. Somewhere out there, Douglas Hale was sleeping peacefully, believing himself untouchable. Somewhere out there, Catherine Mercer was pouring herself a nightcap and admiring herself in a mirror, pleased with the way she had solved her problem by simply allowing another person's problem to become violent. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that Aleandro Castellano never forgot a debt. That debts to him were not things that accumulated interest or faded with time. They were sacred, ancient, written in blood and sealed with silence. Vinny knocked on the office door. "Boss, what do you need us to do?" Aleandro turned from the window, and his expression was the one they knew best, the one that meant someone's world was about to end. "Everything," he said quietly. "I need you to prepare for everything." Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean for the reckoning that was coming. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aleandro's study like fists demanding entry. Mia stood frozen in the doorway, her bandaged hands trembling as she held up the phone. The messages glowed on the screen, each one a countdown. Douglas Hale's words were simple, brutal, mathematical: 48 hours to produce $125,000, or he would come for her himself. Aleandro sat behind his desk, a slab of dark walnut that cost more than Mia's entire life before she met him. He wore a charcoal suit, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light. A single gold ring caught the amber glow of his desk lamp, the sigil of his family, his empire, his absolute authority. His expression did not change as he read the messages. His dark eyes, storm gray at the edges, remained perfectly still. "He knows where you are," Mia whispered. Her voice cracked like old glass. "He has photographs." "Aleandro, he's going to. He's going to do exactly what I'm counting on him to do," Aleandro said. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, like a blade wrapped in ice. "Douglas Hale is predictable. Arrogant men always are. They believe their money protects them. They believe their connections matter." He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded before him. "They are wrong." Mia wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him to let her go, to protect himself from the liability of her presence. But something in his expression stopped her. This was not a man asking her to trust him. This was a man informing her of the way the world was about to reorganize itself. "Sit," he said quietly. She sat a day. The leather chair engulfed her, another object worth more than everything she had ever owned. Outside, the summer storm intensified. Thunder rolled across the city like drums announcing a siege. 20 minutes later, Douglas Hale arrived at the estate gates in a rental car, a silver sedan with aggressive angles. He wore a polo shirt tucked too tightly into khakis, his appearance the calculated projection of a casual businessman. With him were 2 men in jeans and button-ups, muscle barely concealed beneath fabric. They looked like men who solved problems with their hands. Behind them came a second vehicle. Catherine Mercer emerged in a cream-colored suit, her lawyer flanking her like a pilot fish beside a shark. Her face carried the smooth blankness of absolute confidence. She had never lost a social battle. She had never faced consequences for anything. Aleandro walked to the gate flanked by Vinny and Dario. Behind them, 10 more men in charcoal suits arranged themselves in a perfect semicircle. They moved without sound, like a perfectly programmed machine. The rain fell between the 2 groups, creating a curtain of silver. "Ms. Voss is here of her own free will," Aleandro said. His voice did not rise, did not need to. "You have no claim to her." Douglas Hale stepped forward, his jaw clenched with the arrogance of a man who had never truly encountered resistance. "She owes me $125,000. I have a contract, employment agreement, modeling fees, transportation costs. She's contractual obligated to settle her debt before she can leave my organization." "A contract," Aleandro interrupted, each were distinct and deliberate, signed under coercion for a fake agency that is, in actuality, a human trafficking operation. That contract. The color drained from Hale's face. Not because Aleandro had raised his voice. Not because there had been any threat. Simply because the truth had been stated aloud, and all his careful walls had become transparent. Catherine Mercer laughed. The sound was brittle, sharp as breaking glass. These are wild accusations, Mr. Castellano. Douglas is a respected businessman. And frankly, I think this is about you wanting to control a vulnerable young woman for your own purposes. A mafia boss collecting strays. How does that look in the press? Silence fell. The rain continued its percussion against the stone. Even the men in black suits seemed to hold their breath. Choose your next words very carefully, Mrs. Mercer, Aleandro said. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Because I have no tolerance for women who profit from the suffering of children. Inside the estate, Mia watched from the upstairs window. The glass was cold against her forehead. She could see everything, Aleandro standing perfectly still, Douglas Hale trembling despite his attempt at control, Catherine Mercer's smile beginning to crack at the edges. She could see her own reflection superimposed over the scene, a ghost of a girl who had arrived at this house with $34 in her pocket and bruises blossoming across her throat like dark flowers. She held the child's white leather shoes against her chest. She had found them for months ago, abandoned in a donation bin at the women's shelter. Someone had loved a child enough to preserve the record of her first steps. Someone had cared that much. Mia had kept them as a reminder that love had existed somewhere in the world, even if not for her. The voices below escalated. Hale shouted something about legal consequences. Catherine's lawyer brandished papers that meant nothing and everything. Mia's hands began to shake. She could run. She was an expert at running. She had survived 14 states, 3 aliases, and a foster system that taught her that attachment was weakness. Running was breathing. Running was living. Running meant no one could hurt her because no one would ever reach her. But running also meant Douglas Hale would hunt again. Running meant more girls would arrive at his agency with dreams of modeling and leave in cargo trucks, their hopes sold for transportation fees and false promises. Running meant Aleandro would be erased from her life like a stain in water, and she would carry the memory of his gentleness like a knife in her chest. She thought of Emma asking why the nice lady lived in a closet. She thought of her own mother, who had vanished when Mia was 7, leaving her to the system, to strangers with kind faces and violent hands. She thought of Aleandro saying, in that first night after he had pulled her from the rain, "You are not nobody, Mia Voss. The people who did this to you believed that you were. That belief is what I'm going to correct." One thought cut through the panic, clear and sharp as a knife blade. What if I didn't run? She set the white shoes on the nightstand, stood on legs that felt like water, and walked downstairs. When she opened the front door and stepped into the rain, Aleandro turned. Their eyes met across the driveway. She nodded once, a movement barely visible through the storm, but enough. "I'm not running. I'm staying." His expression shifted. Not by much, the briefest tightening at the corner of his mouth. But Vinny saw it. Dario saw it. All 18 men in black suits saw it. In 15 years, they had never seen anything alter their boss's composure. That night, at 4:47 in the morning, when the city was still sleeping, Aleandro made the call. 12 black SUVs converged on Douglas Hale's rental property in downtown Seattle from 4 directions simultaneously. FBI agent Sarah Chen led the tactical team, a warrant in her hand that listed 43 victims spanning 6 years across 5 states. 30 federal agents in tactical gear moved through the building like ghosts, silent and inevitable. They found the servers in the basement. Spreadsheets. Names. Photographs. Financial transactions traced through shell companies and offshore accounts. A record of 43 lives broken into data points, each one converted into profit. Douglas Hale was dragged from his bed in boxer shorts and a cotton shirt, his face pressed hard against the concrete floor. The cuffs clicked around his wrists with the finality of a coffin lid closing. He was trembling, no longer the arrogant businessman but something smaller, something that understood finally and completely that the world did not bend around him. "Please," he was gasping. "Please, I can explain. I have money, I know people, lawyers, connections, please." Agent Chen crouched beside him, her voice cold as January. "You know what you are, Mr. Hale? You're exactly the kind of predator we've been waiting to bury. 43 counts. 40 years minimum. No parole. No deals. Just decades in a federal cell knowing that the whole world watched you fall." Simultaneously, at the Mercer mansion, another team executed a second warrant. They found Catherine's involvement documented in emails and bank transfers, payments to Hale's companies, communications coordinating what she called employee placement, financial records proving she knew exactly what kind of business Douglas Hale ran and took a percentage in exchange for referrals. Catherine Mercer was led out at dawn in handcuffs, her cream suit now stained with spilled coffee, her makeup smeared from where she had collapsed against her marble countertop. News cameras captured every moment. She was screaming about lawyers and injustice and this being a terrible mistake, but her face told the truth. She understood that she was finished. The social standing she had cultivated for 42 years was evaporating like smoke. The federal courthouse 2 days later. Douglas Hale stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, his lawyer beside him mouthing arguments that no longer meant anything. 43 counts of human trafficking. Racketeering. Conspiracy. 40 years minimum. No parole consideration. His hands shook as he gripped the table. His eyes, which had once burned with the certainty of a man who believed himself untouchable, had become empty, hollow, the eyes of someone understanding that the rest of his life would be spent inside concrete walls, that 40 years was a long time to know that the world had seen exactly what he was. Catherine Mercer's sentencing came the following week. 15 counts of conspiracy and money laundering. Significant prison time. More importantly, total financial dissolution. Her assets frozen pending civil suits from the trafficking victims. Her name on every news channel, every social media platform, every conversation at dinner tables across the country. Not as a society matron. As an accomplice to modern slavery. In Aleandro's study, Mia watched the television coverage with the sound muted. Hale's face filled the screen, then Catherine's. Then the courthouse steps, then the holding cells, then the calculations of federal sentencing guidelines that meant these two people would spend the next decades understanding what they had done. Too quick would have been merciful, Aleandro said beside her. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. Death would have been merciful. This, every single day in federal prison, knowing that the entire world saw exactly what they are, knowing that they will never rebuild, never escape, never be anything but defined by this moment, that's justice. Mia's hands, which had been trembling for weeks, finally stilled. She felt something settle inside her chest, some weight that had been crushing her lungs beginning to ease. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't thank someone for doing what's right," Aleandro replied. But what Mia did not yet know was that Aleandro had quietly, without asking for credit or acknowledgement, contacted every one of Hale's 43 victims through social services channels. He had established a recovery fund. He had paid for therapy, housing, education, job training, everything required to rebuild a life after it had been shattered. And when some of them, terrified and broken and uncertain, had arrived at his offices asking what he wanted in return, he had simply said, nothing. "You survived. That's enough." The storm outside began to pass. 1 week later, Mia Voss sat across from Aleandro Castellano in a private booth at Carmelo's, the kind of restaurant where the staff knew not to ask questions and the Mafia boss always faced the door. The red leather seats absorbed the candlelight. Frank Sinatra played softly from hidden speakers. Between them, untouched wine caught the flame like liquid rubies. Mia wore jeans and a soft cream sweater that actually fit her body, clothes Aleandro had delivered to the estate 3 days ago, nothing extravagant, just fabric that didn't hang from her shoulders like a burial shroud. Her bruises had faded to yellow-green. The handprints on her throat were still visible but lighter, like ghosts of what had tried to kill her. She picked at her pasta with a fork, the movements uncertain, as if her hand still did not quite believe they were safe. "You don't have to stay at the estate if you don't want to," Aleandro said. His voice was measured, like a man choosing each word from a locked box. "I can set you up with an apartment. Somewhere in the city. A job that doesn't involve living in a staff closet. Enough money to start over properly. No obligations. No gratitude required." Mia looked up. Her eyes, which had been hollow for weeks, held something new. "Is that what you want?" "I want you to have a choice," Aleandro replied. "Something you haven't had in a long time." Silence swallowed the booth. Outside the restaurant window, rain started again, lighter this time, summer storm passing through its final breath. At a table near the entrance, Vinny and Dario sat with menus they weren't reading, pretending not to watch their boss smile at the woman across from him. "I don't want an apartment," Mia said finally. Her voice came out smaller than the words deserved. "I want to stay. If that's okay. Not because I owe you. Not because of what you did for me. But because," she struggled with the words, watching them arrange themselves in the space between them. "Because you're the first person who looked at me and didn't see something to use." Aleandro's expression shifted, something raw crossing his face like a blade wrapped in ice. For a moment he was not the most dangerous man in Seattle. He was just a man sitting in candlelight, unprepared for kindness he had not earned. "You saved my life that night in the subway," he said quietly. "Not just from bleeding out. He paused, jaw tight. "I've spent 20 years building an empire from violence and survival. Most days I don't remember what it feels like to be human. Then you sat with me, your hand shaking, your pocket carrying everything you owned in the world, and you asked my name like it mattered." "It does matter," Mia whispered. "What happened to you?" she asked. "In the subway." "Who hurt you?" Aleandro was quiet for so long that Mia thought he would not answer. Outside, a car horn sounded, distant and lonely. Inside, there was only breathing and the weight of 48 hours that had changed everything. "Rival family," he said finally. "They wanted to send a message about territory. The knife was meant to be lethal. One cut goes 3 inches deeper and I bleed out before the ambulance arrives. No empire. No legacy. Just another body in a subway tunnel." "But you survived." "Because you stayed," Aleandro said. His eyes met hers. "Do you understand what you did? You, with $34 in your pocket and every reason to walk past a bleeding stranger in the dark. You stopped. You stayed. That kind of courage, that kind of humanity, it's rarer than diamonds. It's rarer than loyalty, and loyalty is the only currency that matters in my world." Mia's throat tightened. She thought of the nights she had slept in subway stations herself, the times she had made herself invisible because visibility meant violence. "I just know what it's like when people walk past. When you're hurt and no one stops." "So do I," Aleandro replied. He reached across the table, not grabbing, not commanding, just offering his hand like a man making a vow. Mia took it. His palm was warm, calloused, scarred in places that told stories she would learn later. Not romance in its softest form, not yet, but the beginning of something that might grow into trust. The understanding that sometimes salvation arrives in the shape of someone who refused to look away. 3 days ago, Aleandro continued, "I didn't know you existed. 3 days ago, I was the man everyone feared. Now I'm the man who clears his entire afternoon to sit across from a woman who still flinches when doors close too fast." "I'm trying not to do that," Mia said. "I know. That's what makes you the strongest person I've ever met." Dario nudged Vinny. Neither man had seen their boss's face arranged like this, soft around the edges, dangerous still but no longer armored. "In 15 years," Dario muttered, "I've never seen him like this." "Like what?" Vinny whispered back. "Like he's not carrying the weight of the world. Like he's just a man having dinner. Back in the booth, Aleandro was speaking again. You asked me once why I'd help you. Why I sent 30 men. Why I did what I did. Here's the truth, we're the same. You and I are built from survival and scars. The difference is you kept your humanity intact. I spent 20 years losing mine in blood and power. I'm just trying to remember how to be human again. Mia squeezed his hand. Then we'll remember together. The rain outside intensified for one moment, then softened. The city beyond the restaurant window glowed with evening lights. Somewhere in Seattle, Douglas Hale sat in a federal holding cell, waiting for trial. Somewhere else, Catherine Mercer waited for sentencing. But in this booth, red leather and candlelight, two people who had survived the unsurvivable found something that looked like peace. 3 months later, Mia stood in the estate garden on a morning when Seattle's perpetual clouds finally broke open to sunlight. Emma Mercer played on the swing set, the little girl's laughter bright and clear like bells. After Catherine's arrest, Child Services had contacted Aleandro. Turned out Catherine had listed him as Emma's godfather years ago, a formality during some business partnership, a name on a document that suddenly became a responsibility, then a choice, then a gift. Emma lived at the estate now. No longer the forgotten child of a socialite but a little girl with a real home, with Mia pushing her on swings and braiding her hair on rainy mornings and making her hot chocolate while Emma drew pictures with crayons. Inside his study, Aleandro watched from the window. Vinny entered with financial reports, property acquisitions, the machinery of empire, but stopped when he saw what his boss was looking at. She's good for you, boss, Vinny said quietly. Both of them. Aleandro nodded. He did not take his eyes off the garden. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. On Mia's nightstand sat Emma's first pair of shoes, the one she had kept from the shelter, before everything shattered, before Hale hunted her, before Aleandro pulled her from the rain with hands that knew violence but chose gentleness instead. Next to the shoes stood a framed photograph, Mia, Aleandro, and Emma at Carmelo's, all three of them smiling like people who had finally found their way home. Mia didn't know that helping a wounded man would change her life. She didn't know that the most dangerous man in Seattle would send 30 men to protect her. She didn't know that survival could turn into something stronger, not romance in its simplest form, but the deep bond between people who have seen darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Douglas Hale would spend 40 years in federal prison for human trafficking, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Catherine Mercer lost her fortune, her freedom, her name. The empire she built on cruelty collapsed within weeks. But Mia Voss? She gained a family. Not the one she was born into, but the one she built from shared scars and mutual rescue. Emma called her Mama now. Aleandro read bedtime stories in a voice like thunder made gentle. They sat together at dinner tables and did not have to be afraid. Because sometimes the most powerful thing in the world isn't wealth or violence or control. It's the simple act of staying when everyone else walks away. It's looking at someone broken and saying, I see you. You matter. You are not invisible anymore. If this story moved your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell us, what would you have done in Mia's position? Would you have stopped for a stranger? We create new stories every single day. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Remember, after the rain, the sky clears. We'll see you in the next video.